everybody. I'm just going to do a little sound check here, and then I'll get started in a couple minutes. So again, I'm just doing a little sound check here just to make sure everything is set up. This is my first time going live on Facebook Live, so getting myself familiar with the technology, making sure everything sounds okay, and then I'll be with you guys soon. Hello everybody, welcome to Building a Bach Suite. Like I said, this is my first time trying out Facebook Live or doing any sort of live stream whatsoever. So this is a little bit of a learning process for me, but good news is we have 6 weeks to figure all that out and iterate and improve like you do. So I wanted to first talk a little bit about the Bach suites themselves. Since today we're focusing on the Prelude, I'll first talk about Bach, the sort of a little bit of the history of the suites, and then also what it means, what the term prelude means, especially in Bach's terms. I'll also give you guys sort of a few things to listen out for, some sort of light music theory, and then I will play the suite. After I play, I'll sort of open up to Q&A, so if you guys have questions, please post them in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions about Bach, about the suites, about the viola, or any sort of music theory questions that you have. I will try to answer them here after I play, and if I don't have an answer, I'll do research, and I will see you next week. So let's get started. So Bach lived from 1685 to 1750, and he was certainly one of the most prolific composers that ever lived. A lot of this has to do with the fact that composers during that time were often employed by either a church or an estate, and so then their job was to compose music, if it was in a church, for like weekly services, for the choir, for any instrumentalists. It also gives reason to why certain composers wrote for certain instruments. You see this a lot in example like Vivaldi. So he was the composer in a chapel there, also at a girls' school. And so then he would write music for whatever skilled student that he had. So if he had a really good flute player, then he would write a flute concerto. Or if he had a really good cello player and a really good bassoon player, he wrote a cello bassoon concerto. And same thing we see with Bach. So you see things that he wrote for piano, for organ, for choir, obviously these cello suites. The cello suites were most likely written sometime between 1717 and 1723, when he was Kapellmeister in Courant, Germany. Kapellmeister is kind of like what it sounds. It comes from the word Kapell, which has origins in choir and orchestra, or originally comes from the word chapel. And then master, so it's sort of the choir master or the chapel master there. These suites were originally written for cello. They're the famous Bach Cello Suites. Violas, we tend to borrow a lot of music from cellos, from violins, from bassoons, from clarinets, mostly because during this period, there's not a lot of viola music written in the sort of classical era or the Baroque era. Once we get a little bit later into the Romantic era, that's kind of like around Beethoven's time, and certainly farther on, especially in the early 20th century, that's when we start getting a lot of music that was written for viola. But we don't have a lot of early music or things in Bach's time. So in order to flesh out the viola's repertoire, we tend to borrow things from that era, like the Bach Cello Suites, which are very easily adapted to viola because the viola has the same 4 strings as a cello, but just an octave up. So it means that it translates or transcribes really easily over to the viola. So let's talk a little bit about the sort of structure of a Bach suite. These are Baroque suites. There are 6 movements to them. The first movement is a prelude, and then it's followed by 5 what we call dance suite, or it's a dance suite. So those 5 movements are based on dance styles from the Baroque era. So specifically in Bach's suites, we have the prelude, then we have an Allemande, we have a Courant, we have a sarabande, and then we have one movement which consists of 2 either minuets, bourrées, or gavottes, and then the 6th movement is a gigue. So that's how Bach set up his suites. There are other suites at the time which use either identical or similar Baroque dance styles, but might have a different overall structure to it. So this week we're focusing on the prelude. Next week I'll give you a little bit of history about what an Allemande means, and then you'll be able to hear that one as well. So there was a large period of time where these suites were very rarely performed, mostly because they're very technically demanding, and also the surviving manuscripts are not really in good shape. Specifically, we don't actually have any manuscripts in Bach's hand that are signed by Bach, that we can authenticate his signature and all that. We do have copies that were written by the hand of his second wife, Anna Magdalena Bach. But even those are a little bit ambiguous, mostly because they're pretty sparse in what she wrote down. So certainly all of the notes and rhythm is there, but there's no other annotations or articulations. So there's no bowing markings, there's no articulation markings, there's no dynamic markings in there. So they're kind of a little bit bare bones, a little bit sparse there. Although what that means is, it means that every time you hear somebody play one of the Bach suites, it's going to be a different experience, because everybody is going to sort of interpret them their own way, since there aren't any concrete notations from the composer's hand. So even though there was a large period of time where these suites were not regularly performed, we can sort of ascribe their revolution to a very famous cellist, Pablo Casals, who sort of revived them in the early 20th century. His recordings are some like super famous recordings of the Bach Cello Suites, and I highly recommend checking them out. His name is Pablo Casals. And so now they're part of like the standard cello and viola repertoire, mostly thanks to Casals there. So back to that idea of the fact that every interpretation or every person's playing is going to have a slightly different interpretation. Again, because we don't have any definitive markings from the composer, it's sort of open to the performer's interpretation or opinion there. So you'll hear some people who play it, sort of very strict, more rhythmical, keeping in, or like more strictly rhythmic, keeping in the sort of Baroque tradition. But then you also hear a fair number of people who play this almost more romantically or more expressively, where they're sort of pushing and pulling and playing with both the rhythm and timing a little bit, and the emphasis of notes. There's definitely, I'm not sure which one I like better. There's definitely value to each of them. I remember one teacher I had encouraged me to walk as I played Bach, so that you could feel like the rhythm and the pacing. And I definitely understand that when we get to the dance movements. The prelude is a little bit different, but obviously with the dance movements, even though nobody actually danced to these Bach suites, they are still based around the rhythm and cadence of Baroque dances. So the idea of sort of walking in that rhythm as you're playing, I can definitely see like how that is helpful. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about specifically the prelude. Let me get up my notes here. So, the Prelude is probably one of the most recognizable pieces for solo cello out there. I'm sure you've all heard it, whether you've heard it in a movie or a concert or a CD. It's the one that goes like this. Pretty recognizable to most people out there if they've heard any classical music ever. Like I said, it's very often used in movies or in TV shows. Yeah. So the preludes were often sort of improvisational in style. So you'll hear a lot of people when they play these Bach suites, they might also add extra ornamentation to some of the preludes, or sometimes in some of the Bach suites in the preludes, there'll be a series of several chords. So it'll be like a chord per measure, and then another chord per measure, and another chord per measure. And they're written out as chords. There might be 4 notes that on the music will be written out vertically on top of one another, indicating that you're supposed to play them all at the same time, or maybe with like a slight roll to them. But I've also heard performers who interpret that as sort of filling out the arpeggio. So they'll, kind of like what you heard at the beginning here, they'll play each note separate, or they might ornament around those notes of a chord, adding to that sort of improvisational style of the preludes. With this one, Bach starts out with those explicit arpeggiated chords here, which are written out. These are not written like vertical chords, they are written out as arpeggios here. And he really takes advantage, in this particular suite, this one is in G major, and so Bach really takes advantage of the open strings of the cello or the viola. So on the viola, we have 4 strings here, the C string, G string, D string, and A string. And in a G major chord, G is the root, is the bottom, the tonic note of the chord, and you also have a G. So here Bach really takes advantage of those open strings, of the very ringing nature of that. Sorry, I said C and G. I meant G and D for G major. So you hear that those G string and the D string ring for a lot longer time because they are open, and you're getting the advantage of the full length of the string without any fingers stopping it there. Yeah, the sort of overall character of this suite, especially in the Prelude, is a very sort of peaceful, tranquil character. Some of the other suites are a little bit more tumultuous, or sad, or joyful, or proud. This one is just very peaceful and tranquil. In this suite, and actually in lots of Bach suites, especially in lots of the pieces that Bach wrote for melodic instruments like violins, cellos, flutes, clarinets, violas, I feel like Bach essentially tries to make those instruments into a piano. With a piano, you've got all of the notes there. You've got 10 fingers. You play with like lots of chords. You play with typically two voices, the sort of upper melody in the right hand and the lower counter melody or the bass line in the left hand. And I feel like with things like the Bach suites or some of Bach's concertos, he really wants those melodic instruments to be an organ or to be a piano. So you get a lot of implied chords throughout this piece. It's really quite genius the way that he sets up notes to either imply a chord or to imply two voices, where he'll jump from a higher register and then it'll be sort of like a call and response from a higher register to a lower register there. And that, like I said, sort of implies that there is more than just one voice playing. Obviously, even though there is only one voice playing. So I have a few things that I'd love for you guys to listen out for, and this is sort of light music theory bit. Things to listen out for are those implied chords, right? At the beginning, it's a little bit more explicit, where he does sort of open with those arpeggiated chords. You can sort of imagine, like, if somebody was playing on a piano, how that would sound. And also, I would like you to listen out for those sort of multiple voices, where he does set up this sort of call and response from like a higher register to a lower register. Let me see if I can give you an example of what I mean by that there. So this comes in the middle of the piece. So you see how he kind of goes back and forth from the upper register on the A and D string, and then has those answering bits on the G and C string. So those are those sort of implied back and forth between a higher voice and a lower voice there. You can sort of imagine that as if like the right hand in the piano was playing one part and the left hand in the piano was playing another part there. Actually, I'm going to need this for more examples. Yes, we talked about implied chords. We talked about implied multiple voices there. Some other sort of interesting things here. So Bach, I swear, was like a mathematician for music. He really had this grasp of like how to take a melody and sort of turn it on its head, or invert it, or double time it, or half time it, and still make it work harmonically. So you see a lot of that in his fugues, especially. He'll take a melody and then he'll play with it. He'll either put it in a different key, or again he'll elongate it, or he'll shorten it, or he'll turn it upside down. So it's the same notes, but instead of going down, it'll actually go up and have the sort of melody there in inversion. And we get a little bit of that here in the Bach suite, or in the Prelude here. One example of that is, so at the beginning, I played those open arpeggiated chords there, starting from a lower string and going to a higher string. At the end, in the finale, or the sort of final climax here, he does the same chord but starts from the upper string and goes down. So what I mean by that here is in the beginning we have, you see how it's starting low and going to a higher string and sort of oscillating there. At the end, he starts from a high string and then comes down. Like so. I'm looking at some questions from the chat here. Cool. Well, we'll talk about those after I play the Prelude there. Sweet. No pun intended. Sweet. Okay. So listen out for those times where Bach takes a melody or an idea or like a riff or a motif, and then he turns it upside down there. It's all throughout Bach's work. Maybe a little bit less so in this particular Prelude, but it's definitely something to keep your ear out for as you listen to Bach. Another cool bit here, there's lots of cool bits, but one of the other cool bits here is towards the end. So this movement plays a lot with oscillating between different strings, either having those rolling arpeggiated chords, or just sort of like just going back and forth between two strings. You'll see that a lot towards the end of this movement here. And there's one place where I'm going back and forth between the D and the A string, although with other notes there. But I'm just going back and forth between those two strings. And actually, you sort of climb up the D string, and so then the notes on the D string are actually higher than the A string. Typically, obviously, if the string is higher, then you use that to reach higher notes. But it gives an interesting tone quality if you play higher notes on a lower string, right? So at the end here, you'll hear this part that goes. So there, the A string is constant, and you hear this melody that climbs up to that high D there, which is higher than the A string. This D string is the same as this note on the A string. So that's sort of a cool little part. I'll play it one more time here. For that there at the end. I think that's all I have to share with you about the sort of history of this suite and of the Bach suites in general. Again, if you guys have questions, please drop them in chat. I'll take a look here after I'm done, and I'll try and answer them for you guys this week. So without further ado, or actually after I tune my viola maybe again, this will be Bach's the Prelude to Bach's First Cello Suite. the Prelude from Bach's first cello suite. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you listened out for some of those things we talked about. And now, I want to open up to the chat. I have you guys ask questions. I'll try and answer them here for you. I know I had one that Bobby had posted in the, let's see here, in the event page. So let's see here. Jason Platt asks, could you please remind us of your viola's name? Oh yeah, so this is my new viola. I love it. I got this over the summer. I purchased this in August after about a year-long search. So I wanted to upgrade my instrument, get a new one here. So I flew all around the country. I think I tried, I don't know, over 30, 40 violas. I went to a bunch of different shops. I also went to individual current makers of instruments. I went to their local shop, which is, most of them is like, they have their house and they have like a little studio right next to their house. They were all super gracious and helpful, and yeah, it was a really fascinating process. And then I had it narrowed down to about 5 violas, 2 which came from Robertson and Sons, a very famous shop in Albuquerque, 2 that came from Cleveland Violins in Cleveland, and then 1 that came from a current maker that I really liked, and that my teacher Jeffrey Irvine from when I was in school in Cleveland had highly recommended. And so then I had all of those places ship the violas to me here in Denver, so I could have all 5 side by side. I actually did something crazy where, you know, it was in the summer, it was super hot, and so Cleveland Violins was concerned about shipping the instruments in such heat, understandably. And I was like, oh no, I'm gonna miss the window for like when I can get all of these instruments in one place at one time. So I actually flew to Cleveland and back in one day just to pick up 2 violas. And I had one of the guys who works at the shop, who actually, I was in school at the same time. He was at a neighboring school, Lansing Wells. He actually like met me at the airport with these 2 violas. I feel like it was like the briefcase with like the handcuff, and like we passed off the violas, and then I just literally got right back on, I think, the exact same plane that I got off of, and flew back to Denver. So, and then by the time it was time to ship them back, the temperature had changed. It had gotten a little bit cooler, and we felt safe sending those violas back. But that's where this one actually came from. This was one of those violas. It came from the shop Cleveland Violins in Cleveland, and it is by a French maker, Nicolas Gilles, who lives in Montpellier. It was made about 2015, so it's a pretty new instrument, although I was really taken with how not new the sound was. Typically a lot of new instruments have a very very forward, very bright, and almost brassy sound to it. And then over the years, they mellow out as you play them more and more. And I was really taken with how this one didn't sound like that. And I also sort of really fell in love with the low register. So you can hear here. Yeah, that low register there, I just, really loved there. So this viola does not yet have a name. I have a few that I've been toying with, potentially Giles, or maybe Vera. So there's a couple of names that I'm toying with, but this one does not yet have a name. My old viola, who is still around as my backup instrument, that one was Roland, but this one doesn't have a name yet. So let's see. Jason Platt also asks, are there specific features of the suites that support the claim that they were authored by Bach? Yes, but I'm not sure if I can give any specific examples, mostly because I'm not a music historian, so I don't know if I have any examples that really like are sort of a Bach signature. I mean, they sound like Bach, to me at least. I will try and do a little bit more research and see if I can find some more specific, concrete examples for next week there. So let's see. Oh, here's a good one. So Jonathan Eng, who is an amazing jazz violinist, he was previously in Seattle, out in New York now. You should definitely go listen to his music. top-notch violin player, also great at classical. We met up a few months ago and played some Mozart violin viola duets, and it was lovely. He asks, can you talk a bit about your approach to parsing out phrases? Yeah, so this goes back to that idea that different people interpret Bach different ways. So I tend to play my Bach a little bit more expressively, rather than a little bit more Baroque-like. And this is one of the actually the questions that I wanted to ask you guys about for you to mull over, and also post in the chat, sort of vote for it. But when I look at Bach, I'll talk a little about what I do, and then I'll give you guys some options here. So when I look at Bach, I look at sort of where those major chord changes are, because he'll start in a key, but then he'll modulate to a different key as you start adding those like extra like high notes or like sharp notes or flat notes there, right? So at the beginning, it's very clearly in G major. Right, it starts out with a big G major chord there. As he goes on, he starts to modulate, and then you hear some like really gnarly notes as he goes on, right? So you have there we've gotten to sort of D major there, which is the dominant of G. Remember we talked about at the beginning how it has this chord which has a G and also has a D. Because that D is in that opening G major chord, it's a very closely related key. So it's very common for composers to start in the key of G, and halfway through they get to D major. But even here, right, he adds in those sharp notes and those flat notes there as it starts to morph into an even different key there. So I try and look at sort of where those pillars are of those not only chord changes, but like arrival moments when you go from G to D major there. And I use that as like a goal, right? As like something that I'm aiming for there, that everything preceding somehow leads up to this high D note there, right? Like that's the midpoint, that's the halfway point there. And then within that, you can find little examples. It's kind of like a fractal in that way, where like you've got this big idea that like there's this overarching thing that wants to land over here, but then inside you have all these other ones that are like smaller mirrors of that big idea there. So that's kind of what I look for when I sort of roadmap Bach out for me. And also I look for those notes, those weird notes, or those notes that you want to have more stress on there. And so then I sort of build those phrases around those interesting notes. Cool. Let's see what else we got here. Emily asks, are there any other Bach works that particularly informed your interpretation of the suites? What are some of your other favorite Bach pieces? I mean, a lot of the Bach pieces that were written for solo strings, those are the things that really inform my ideas and opinions and phrases of Bach. So the Bach Cello Suites, there's also a set of 6 sonatas and partitas for solo violin, which are in a lot of ways similar to the Bach Suites, but also very different because he is writing for violin. So even though I talked about how Bach obviously really loved like the organ and the piano and choral stuff, he still did write for those specific instruments. Like he didn't ignore the fact that this is a viola, or this is a violin, or this is a cello, and the context of what that instrument has at its disposal as far as register and tone quality and character. But I feel like the Bach Cello Suites and the Bach violin partitas and sonatas are things that really informed my opinion of how, like, those phrases and the sort of like statement that Bach has, or sort of like, I don't know, his artistic statement of what he stands for and what he means, and what he's writing about. Let's see. Margot says, can you talk a little bit about the different clefs the string instruments use? Yeah, so this one might be a little bit more technical. I'll try and bring this up if you can see. Let's see here. Okay. So here, that is the alto clef, commonly referred to as the viola clef. This is a treble clef, and that's what violins use exclusively. Violas tend to oscillate between these two clefs, and it really depends on the register that you're playing in. So those clefs they handle the register of those instruments really well. There's also bass clef, with which the cello uses. Or for pianos, they use treble clef in the right hand, and then bass clef in the left hand, most of the time. Sometimes those hands will also flip-flop and stuff. Basically, when you sort of run ahead of lines, then that's the opportune moment to switch to a new clef. So like I said, violas start in that alto clef, the viola clef there, because it works with the register of the viola. But every time we get up high, right, so like at the end there, as it is sort of climbing up the viola, there comes a point where there would just be too many ledger lines for those notes. So let me give you an example here. You guys can see. So right here, there we go. You start to get a note that has like a line through it, and then here's a note that sits on top of that line. And then here you have a note which has two lines, right? So as it's getting higher, you sort of add more lines. And here's where we switch to treble clef, because at this point, all of these notes up here, we just have too many ledger lines above the staff. So, like I said, you sort of fit the clef towards whatever register you're playing in. So cellos typically play in bass clef. When they get a little bit higher, they go into tenor clef. And when they get even higher, sometimes they will even go into treble clef as they sort of go up the fingerboard of the cello there. Another question from Platt here. It says, if there aren't really any dynamic markings from Bach, do you mark up your copy of the music with your preferred interpretation? If not, do you do things differently each time you play it? I really like this edition of the Bach Suites. It's based around the Anna Magdalena manuscripts, so when you get it, it's pretty sparse. There's a few dynamic markings here, but otherwise, let's see here. You guys can see some of my markings. So I put in like little crescendos here, and then I want to have a sudden pianissimo, and then I want to get loud again, and I have more crescendo. And I also have like lots of other like notations as far as bowings or notes to myself. So yeah, I mark my parts up to hell. Like there's all sorts of stuff here. And sometimes I will have different interpretations. I might write like one above the staff and one below the staff, and then sort of depending on my mood. Also, I feel like some of this stuff has changed over the years. Like the way I played this suite when I was in high school is very different than the way that I played this suite in college, which is different than the way that I played it now. Although probably from college to now it's pretty similar. So yeah. Let's see what else we got here. Robert Dickinson asks, anything that really is unique about Bach and his pieces, and how you would play it versus other Baroque composers like Handel, Vivaldi, Purcell, Corelli, etc. All of those composers have a very different character and a very different style to them. Bach is very technical, so there are a lot of notes in Bach. And it keeps going. So I feel like there's always something going on in Bach, and the sustain notes are almost implied, but there's always this undulating stuff underneath it there. Versus Vivaldi's a little bit lighter, and I hesitate to use the word airy. versus Handel is a little bit later in style than Bach or Vivaldi. So you start to get things that border on the classical, or that sort of bridge between the Baroque era and the classical era. So you get things that are like a little bit more hearty there, and even like hints of things to come from the Romantic era there. So yeah, I mean, each of those composers have a different style and different character, and there's a different way that you would interpret and play them. Fred Johnson asks, so Fred is one of the violinists I play with in quartets here in Denver. Fred asks, please comment about your increase in tempo in measure 28 and 30. Let's see here. 1, 2. Oh, yeah. So this goes back to, this is something that I wanted to ask you guys about and see if you have a preference. So again, going back to the idea of different interpretations of Bach, some people will play this a little bit more like in almost more Baroque style, a little bit more strict rhythm. Other people play it a little bit more expressively. So what Fred is referring to here is there's a part sort of 2/3 the way through that goes. Right, so it has this like cascading scale down here, and this is after that big climax, right? We had that part that goes. Noodles around there for a bit, and then finally. So I play that a little bit more expressively there. I play with I sort of push and pull the tempo a little bit there, because I like this sort of tumbling feeling of those cascading notes there. So somebody who was playing this a little bit closer to the Baroque style might do. Right, it's very even. It's got this sort of walking feeling to it, very like, almost like I don't know, a procession in a way. Versus something that's like a little bit more expressive might be. And I exaggerate there even from what I did. But I want you guys to vote in the chat. Which do you like better? Would you, if you were playing this, or if you're listening to this, do you like more of the like strict rhythm of the Baroque era, that like processional kind of feeling, or do you like the sort of tumbly, expressive of the second option there? I'll give you another example. At the beginning, I could play those opening arpeggios, again, very Baroque or very processionally-ish, or I could play them very expressive. So the first way, more in rhythm. Or I could play them a little bit more expressively. Chat, if this were you, or if you're listening to it, do you like the Baroque rhythmic idea, or do you like the sort of rolly expressive idea there? I'm sort of torn myself as to which I like, although I tend to fall a little bit closer towards the expressive side rather than the Baroque side. Cool. Let's see what else here. Also, I want to give a big shout out to David, who is helping me collate the questions here, so it's a little bit easier for me to find. So we also had one from Bobby, who had posted this in the event page. So there's an event page for this. You can go, there'll be updates there, or if in the middle of the week, or if you listen to this again and you realize, oh, I should have asked this, please post it in the event page, or you can send me a message on Facebook Messenger, and I will be happy to answer that either to you personally or in next week's live stream. So this is one from Bobby that says, okay, so why should we care about Bach? Aside from whether or not you find his music pleasant, though of course that could be enough, why is Bach the way that you're working on your viola? So I mentioned in my sort of statement about what, like this live stream here, I mentioned I've got all this time on my hand and I have no job for the foreseeable future, and so I was thinking about ways to both use my time and possibly raise some money for myself, and I was like, I'll commit to challenging myself to learn a movement of a Bach suite each week, at least for the next 6 weeks, which would take us through suite 1. Bach is super important to the entire history of Western music. He is one of the first pillars that really codifies a lot of the paradigm that we use for classical music, that takes it from sort of all the way from Gregorian chant era, which is very simple and very monolithic, and very open in harmonies, and obviously there's other composers along the way, but Bach was sort of that next milestone marker of taking it to the next level, where he really fleshes out those chords and adds in lots of extra interesting notes and stuff, and he was so prolific, and he was very consistent in the way that he wrote. So there are certain things that Bach would or wouldn't do, harmonically, melodically, ways that different instruments engage with one another, and he really set up a lot of the sort of rules that we talk about. If you talk about music theory, so many of them were codified by the way that Bach wrote. And because we have so many examples that are so consistent, it's really easy to see a lot of the traditions of harmonies and progressions and chords, that why this chord wants to go to this chord, or why this note wants to go to this note, or if you put these two notes together and then resolve them a certain way, it gives this certain effect. And so I feel like everybody after that was either in alignment with those paradigms set up from Bach, or were constantly pushing and contrasting that to progress and change the change the fabric of classical music there. So as a music student, it's super important to study Bach for those reasons, to sort of understand where everything came from in a way, to sort of know your history and know why things sound a certain way. And again, like I said, Bach set up so much for Western music, and why the end of a piece sounds final, right? When you have that dominant chord, why it so wants to resolve to that tonic chord, and why it sounds so satisfying in that way, because the rest of Western music is really based upon that. As far as why I am studying these, or why anybody studies, any music student studies Bach, they're super technical pieces. There's sort of everything in Bach, right? There's scales, there's arpeggios, there's soaring melodies, there's fast articulated notes, there's long slurs of your bow, there's short notes, there's staccato, there's every articulation under the sun for the most part in Bach, and also, like I said, things like scales and arpeggios that are the foundation, and those small little nuggets that you see over and over in the rest of music, it's there in Bach. So yeah, and also they're just really hard. So the more you can perfect this, then it really pushes your technical prowess, for sure. All right. I think I've answered most of the questions that I've been seeing here in the chat, and also pasted over from David. Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I think, because I've talked a long time, and I know people are sort of flowing in and out of the live stream, I think I want to play this prelude for you guys one more time. Again, since this week we just have the prelude, next week we'll have multiple movement, the weeks after that we'll have more movements here. But for those of you who joined during the Q&A and heard a little bit more about Bach here, I think I'll go ahead and play the prelude one more time for you guys before we close. So here is the prelude from Suite Number 1. Prelude from Bach Suite Number 1. I thank you guys for joining me. If you guys are interested in donating, I would really appreciate it. If you don't, no problem. I know everybody's in different situations, especially considering the current times. But I've left my PayPal and Venmo information up there. So if you enjoyed what you heard or you thought you learned a little bit, please consider donating. I really would appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you guys next week, where I'll talk about the second movement, the Allemande. And then you'll hear both the Prelude and the Allemande, and the weeks proceeding will continue like that. I hope you guys have a lovely day. Take care, stay safe. Thanks, guys. Bye.